Okay, you're transitioning out of the military and you've gotten your resume, that 6-page resume full of military jargon, down to 2 pages that we civilians understand. You know what job you'd like to look for, maybe even the industry. You've researched all of the possibilities online for jobs, and you've been networking. You've got your Dress for Success outfit. Now you're ready to be interviewed, and you finally get called. So let's talk about some of the things to remember when you actually go to the interview. First, research the company. You want to be prepared to ask them questions. So hopefully they're online and you can look up their mission statement, and you can find things, especially questions around how they do business and how you might fit. Remember when you get there that your interaction with everyone from security, the reception point, any assistants that may take you in for the interview, this is part of your interview process, and often they're asked, what did you think? How did they treat you? Be confident. Look, you've got a lot of skills to market. You've got training, discipline, observation skills. You understand protocol, you follow orders, you know how to take appropriate risk. You work well in teams, you're reliable. These are things that are very, very important in private industry. This is what you want to market. Give examples of your accomplishments. You have to be careful when you do this because often I've heard some of the transitioning soldiers that I've spoken with describe themselves as handling something brilliantly, or that they're very accomplished. Instead, give examples of that. Talk about things that you've done, perhaps your team when you've led them in a very difficult situation, times when you've kept something under budget or finished early. These are the kinds of accomplishments you want to talk about. It's okay to talk about the awards that you've been given, and it would also be okay to quote your commanding officer and what he or she might have said about you. Be yourself. You know, they know what you look like on paper. They're calling you in now to see what your personality's like. Would you be a fit for their culture? So, you know, take a deep breath and be yourself. Enjoy this process. Let them know who you are. You don't want to talk about wages during your interview. That's something that you wait until you're being offered a job. But sometimes you're kind of baited, so they may ask you what you expect to be paid. Answering that question is a no-win for you. So I suggest you could respond by saying something like, "Are you making me an offer?" Keep it light, of course. But when you finally are offered the job, you have, if it's too low, you have the option, of course, of saying no. They already know they want you. They might come back and offer you a bit more. But one of the things you want to remember is most companies promote from within. So if you get your foot in the door, you may find that you can move up very quickly once they see what you can do. So those are some things you'll have to think through. But you may not get exactly what you want for starting pay. Also, and lastly, let them know you want the job. Might be appropriate to tell them that as the interview winds down, or you may want to send them a note later and tell them you're very, very interested in the job. So, best of luck.
When getting ready for a formal interview, never underestimate the value of practice and preparation. How do you get started? I'd first recommend that you go out to the internet and use your favorite web browser to look up the top 20 interview questions. And be sure to look for some questions that are behavioral in nature. Something like, tell me about a time when you had to lead a project to success. And then sit down and actually write out your answers to all of those questions so that you can fully prepare. Then it's a good idea to scrub your answers and look for things like military lingo or terms or acronyms that someone with no military background may not understand. When thinking about your job experiences and how you might describe those to the interviewer, it's also a good idea to be careful about using a military title or rank or even the job position that you held. Sometimes this can limit the possibilities that people might see you in. Instead, think about those experiences and what skill sets you needed to drive yourself to success. And throughout the interview, emphasize the skill sets that you bring. It's my experience that this will broaden the possibilities that people see in terms of what jobs you might be appropriate fit for. Last but certainly not least, force yourself to sit down and do a mock interview. Find a friend or a mentor or former colleague that's willing to be 100% honest with you and give you good feedback. Dress the part. Give them the questions that you've been preparing for and ask them to ask you additional questions that you might not have prepared for. Sit down in a setting very similar to an interview and actually go through the entire process from start to finish. Then ask them for feedback. How were your answers? Were they understandable? Was there anything that you said that needed more detail or more explanation? What types of mannerisms did you use? Did you have any funny body or nonverbal responses that you should be aware of? It's far better to take the risk of getting some hard feedback in a practice situation than to find yourself in the middle of the interview regretting that you did not prepare or practice more for the interview. Good luck.
So one thing that I've realized in working with a lot of military and transitioning service members is the fact that the military ingrains in us a team mentality. So we're usually focused on not I, but we. What can we as a team accomplish? This comes across as a little vague during an interview because when we're interviewing people, we want to know exactly that your accomplishments accomplish that goal, work towards that goal. And if you're not singling out the things that you did, that's a big issue. So one thing when I do mock interviews with some of my clients is that a lot of times they're saying, our unit did this, or we did this, or we accomplished that, or we met this deadline. But the we's really take away from what you did as an individual. We really want to know that we're hiring you, not the unit. So we need to know what you actually did to make those things possible. What actions did you take? What were your responsibilities in order to achieve that goal? So when you're doing an interview, you want to make sure that you're talking about the things that you did. You want to say I instead of we. It's a very different thing, and it's a very different mentality for a lot of service members because we're very humble and we're more likely to talk about our unit, and because we don't talk about what we did, we talk about what everyone accomplished. So taking that we out and really focusing on the I is going to be essential for an interviewer to know exactly what you did in order to accomplish those tasks. The other thing I would say is do away with the would. A lot of people in an interview revert back to the I would do this, I would do that. More interviews are behavioral than anything else. So we want to know, we ask situational questions. We ask, what would you do in this situation? But what we're really asking was what you have done in those situations, because that shows you've actually been in those situations and you've done certain things in order to get past them. So the would is pretty constant because every person I've interviewed in the past has said, I would do this and I would do that. We all know the correct answer. We all know what we should be doing. So we say, I would do this and I would do that. But what you really should be saying is, as a matter of fact, in the past, when I've come across this situation, these are the things that I've done in order to come across it. Because the best indicator of your future actions are what you've done in the past. So that's what an interviewer or a hiring manager will look at when they look back at the interview responses. They're going to look back at, okay, has this person actually done this, or do they actually know what's supposed to be done? Because knowledge versus experience is very different when we're weighing out the experience of a candidate. The other thing I would recommend is having 5 stories of which you are the hero. This is kind of difficult for a lot of service members because we don't talk about ourselves. Again, we're not bragging, we're humble, so we don't talk about all the things we've accomplished as a person. We talk about things we've accomplished as a unit. But talk about the examples that you have where you actually made it possible for something to happen. You were the hero because you found a vendor that was able to provide things at a last minute, in a last minute situation at a low budget cost. Those are the things that employers are looking for. So if you keep 5 stories in your back pocket, of which you are the hero, where you were the person who made things happen and accomplished certain things, those will usually come across as relevant to various situations. So typical questions you'll be asked are about your strengths, about your weaknesses, about difficult situations. So if you keep those stories in your back pocket, you'll already have examples to give, but also you'll have quantifiable results, which is ultimately what employers are looking for, the results. What were the results of the actions that you took? And if you have those already memorized or at least practiced somewhat, then you'll be able to roll them off when somebody asks you a question and make them relevant to the situation. The last thing I would recommend is to know your negotiables. Now, you're not going to get into a salary negotiation until you're actually offered the position. You never bring that up until then. But once you do, you want to make sure that you know what you want to negotiate on. A lot of my clients come to me and say, well, I have to make this number, this dollar amount. Well, it's good to know your budget, but it's also good to know your budget for that particular position that you're applying for, because you may be willing to take less money for that position if you're able to get an incremental raise every year for, or if you have a cost of allowance, or if they will allow you a flexible schedule, or if they will allow you to work remotely. Those are things you might value over money. So even though it's not the dollar amount that you're looking for, it may be something that they can negotiate into that will compensate for the lack of funds, maybe some of the other things that you value, like your work-life balance. A lot of my clients talk about the fact that they're not able to spend time with their family when they're in the military because they're constantly being deployed or they're TDY. So in this situation, if that's something that you value, maybe they can offer you a 4-day work week. And in that situation, you may be willing to take a little less money for that work-life balance. So keep those negotiables in mind so that when you do get the job offer, you're not just looking at the dollar amount, but the full compensation package.